The twin sons of Valkera IV beat mercilessly on the shoulders of Cassian Holt as he trudged through the shifting dunes. Sweat carved muddy trails down his dust-caked skin, each step a battle against exhaustion. His rifle, though lightweight by design, felt heavier with every passing mile. He muttered under his breath, "Why in the void did I sign up for this death trap?" 3 weeks into his stint with the Celestial Bounty Coalition, and already he regretted the decision. The credits were generous, enough to pay off the debts he'd racked up back on Mars, but the job was proving deadlier than promised. As if summoned by the thought, a sharp ping buzzed from his communicator. "Holt, report," came the voice of Commander Rin, terse and gravelly. "Still breathing, sir. No sign of the Ember Blades in this sector. Keep moving. Intelligence suggests their camp is near the Dune Vale. You're not alone, others are converging." "Understood," he said, though the crackling static hinted their link wouldn't hold long. Valkera's magnetic storms had a reputation. The Ember Blades. A crew of pirate raiders infamous across the outer verge for their brutality. Cassian scanned the horizon, shielding his eyes with a gloved hand. Then, a flicker of movement near a wrecked transport half buried in sand. He dropped to his stomach, pulled out his monocular, and zeroed in. 6 figures. 5 in the unmistakable crimson armor of the Blades. The 6th knelt beside the vehicle, making hurried repairs. Cassian tapped his communicator. "Commander, visual on 5 Blades and 1 unknown 2 clicks south-southwest. Do you copy?" "Static." "Perfect," he grumbled, slithering back behind a jagged outcropping. "Either wait for backup, or go in alone." The decision was yanked from his hands when one of the pirates began walking straight toward his position. He ducked low, checking his rifle, his breathing steady. The footsteps neared, crunching on sand and stone. Just before the pirate crested the hill, another figure launched from the rocks like a ghost. In seconds, the pirate was on the ground, disarmed and unconscious. Cassian's rifle snapped upward, aimed at the assailant. "I wouldn't, human," said a smooth voice, confident, melodic, and unfamiliar. The attacker turned, and for a moment, Cassian stared. She was alien, yes, but striking. Her skin shimmered like sunlit copper, marked with glowing runes that traced her collarbone. Her silver-white hair was tied high, strands drifting across eyes so vividly violet they almost pulsed. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, still aiming. "Not your enemy," she replied. "And not theirs either. You took him down awfully fast for someone not involved. I've got history with them." She glanced at his coalition patch. "Bounty hunter?" "Cassian Holt." "Naila Vereen," she said, lowering her blade but not her guard. "Tactical freelancer." "You mean merc." "I mean asset," she smirked.
Cassian finally lowered his rifle. "You tracking them?" "Been following that crew since they torched my settlement on Lydon 3. They killed everyone." He noted the way her fingers curled slightly at the memory. He recognized that kind of pain. "I'm supposed to wait for my unit," he said, "but comms are fried, and I doubt they're anywhere close." "Then let's end this ourselves," she said, her tone flinty. "Kill the bastards. Take their ride. Use it to get to the base." He hesitated. Naila looked at him, head tilted. "Or would you rather wait around and hope they find you first?" Cassian smirked despite himself. "You always this charming?" "Only with heavily armed strangers." They crept along the rim of the dune, watching the pirates. 2 guarded the wreck, 1 patrolled lazily, the others ducked inside a makeshift canopy. Naila outlined the plan in quick, efficient bursts. "I take the 2 outside and the patroller. You handle the ones inside." Cassian raised an eyebrow. 3 on 1. "You'll manage." "Cocky." "Experienced," she said with a wink. "On my mark." They split, slipping into the gathering twilight. As shadows lengthened, Naila moved with impossible grace. In a fluid arc, she struck the first guard, quiet, surgical. The second went down with a sweep of her leg and a follow-up to the throat. She danced between them like firelight, blades flashing. Cassian, meanwhile, crept behind the canopy. Voices drifted out, two pirates arguing over loot. He cut a slit in the back wall, slid inside, and struck fast. One never saw the blade that pierced his neck. The other reached for his pistol, but Cassian slammed him against the crate, twisting hard. Silence. Outside, blaster fire cracked. He bolted out just in time to see Naila vault the skimmer, twin pistols flashing. One pirate collapsed instantly. The last fired wildly until Cassian dropped him with a clean shot. Naila holstered her weapons. Nice aim. Nice footwork. They looted the corpses quickly. Credits, spare power cells, rations, and most importantly, a data core blinking with coordinates. Cassian scanned the contents. Got M. Their base is in the obsidian hollows. Naila peered over his shoulder, their faces nearly touching. She smelled like spice and ozone. That's a solid day's journey. Let's not waste time, then, Cassian said, loading the gear. They climbed into the skimmer. As he took the controls, she scanned the dark dunes behind them. We should find shelter for a few hours. Nocturnal drones patrol these paths. Cassian nodded, steering toward a rock formation in the distance. They parked in a narrow alcove, concealed by overhanging cliffs. While he set up motion sensors, Naila built a fire with practiced efficiency. In the flickering light, she finally relaxed a little. So, he said, wiping his rifle. Freelancer, huh? I worked logistics and infiltration for outer sector colonies. Until the blades hit mine. I'm sorry. You get used to loss, she said quietly. He didn't answer, but offered her his thermal jacket when he saw her shiver. She hesitated, then accepted. Won't you freeze? Martian blood, he said with a smirk. We're tough. She smiled faintly. Thanks. Cassian. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. She curled against the wall, her silver hair tumbling loose over the jacket. Cassian kept an eye on the dunes, rifle across his lap. He glanced at her once, then again. There was something about this woman. Something more than her beauty or skills. Something raw and real. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, he wasn't alone. The twin moons were just beginning to dip below the jagged ridgelines when Cassian stirred Naila from her sleep. Time to move, he said softly. She sat up, pulling the thermal jacket tighter for a moment before handing it back. Thanks for the watch. He shrugged. We've got about 14 hours before that data says they shift bases. We need to hit them fast. Naila nodded and began checking her weapons with smooth, practiced motions. Her calm under pressure only deepened his respect. They crept back to the skimmer and headed across the dusty flats toward the obsidian hollows, a sharp gash in Volcara's crust where the pirates had dug into the rock. The desert slowly faded into shadow as dawn's light scattered pink across the horizon. Just after midday, they found a rise above a collapsed ridge, offering a clear vantage point over a small pirate outpost. From here, Cassian counted 5 pirates, 2 near the skimmer, 1 circling the perimeter, and 2 inside a rough canvas shelter. Just like before. Same deal, he asked. Naila shook her head. We adapt. They're awake. More alert. I'll draw their eyes, create a distraction. You cut inside and take the tent. Cassian frowned. You sure? She looked at him, her violet eyes gleaming. You said you were good. Time to prove it. He smirked. Don't die. No promises, she whispered. Naila moved first, darting out from behind a rusted skiff, firing short, deliberate bursts. The guard by the skimmer went down in a blink, and the second crouched behind cover. The patroller shouted, raising an alarm, but it was already too late. Naila ducked a return bolt and rolled behind an engine husk, popping out on the other side to finish the job. Cashin sprinted low through the dust toward the tent's backside. He slashed a hole and dove in just as one pirate turned at the sound. Cashin's blade caught him at the ribs. The second had a pistol halfway drawn, but Cashin ducked and drove a boot into his chest, sending him sprawling. A final stab, and silence fell again. Outside, a brief firefight had ended. Naila stood, breathing heavily, checking her ammo cartridges. Cashin emerged, nodding. "Well?" she asked. "Two dead," he confirmed. "One almost messed up my boot." She gave him a crooked smile and moved to the fallen pirates. "Start looting. We need maps, comm logs, anything."
They found a portable data hub in one of the crates, still powered and transmitting. Naila scanned through the logs, her voice turning sharp. "They've got a central command in the hollow shielded. Underground. But this," she tapped a blinking signal, "is a priority transmission. They're moving something big. Pre-collapse tech. Destination redacted." Cashin whistled. "That's way above pirate grade." She nodded grimly. "If they've got ancient weapons, we can't just hit and run. We need to stop this." They loaded up the pirate skimmer and ditched their original vehicle, which now had a cracked stabilizer. The new one hummed smoothly over the sand as they veered toward the hollows, engines low. By late afternoon, the heat was unbearable. Cashin noticed the way Naila's posture shifted, how her usual grace was dulled by the rising temperature. He scanned the horizon and saw a cavern entrance along a dry rock bluff. "We rest," he said. "You're fading." "I'm fine," she said, but winced as she adjusted her seat. He parked and hopped out. "Sure you are." Inside the shaded cavern, he lit a low fire while Naila unstrapped her vest. She was sweating through her top. He noticed a dark stain along her left side. "You're hit," he said, crossing the space quickly. "It's a scratch." Cashin peeled back her gear to find a nasty gash. "Rock shrapnel?" She nodded reluctantly. "Caught it on the last dive." He grabbed his medkit. "Let me clean it." As he dabbed antiseptic on the wound, Naila hissed and turned her face away. "No peeking, remember." "Believe me, I'm only looking at your side," Cashin said, half amused. "Mostly." Despite herself, she laughed. Typical human male. He worked in silence for a moment, but his mind wandered. The intricate marks across her skin, natural patterns, shifting slightly with light and heat, were unlike anything he'd seen. "These patterns," he said softly. "They're not tattoos." "No. Lyrian dermal evolution. They change as we age. As we experience. They're beautiful." She paused, then gave a soft, almost shy, "Thank you." He finished bandaging the wound and handed her back her top. They sat side by the fire, saying nothing for a while. Then Cashin spoke, voice low. "I've never worked with someone like you." Naila turned toward him. "Is that a compliment?" "I think so." Their eyes locked for a moment. The silence thickened. Then she broke it, rising and brushing sand from her knees. "Get some rest, soldier. I'll take the next watch." Cashin lay back with a grunt, staring at the flickering shadows on the cave roof. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but the mission now felt different. Somewhere in the hunt, he'd found more than a partner. He just didn't know what it meant, yet. Cashin snapped awake to the sharp hiss of plasma fire ricocheting off stone. The acrid scent of scorched rock filled the air. "We've got company." Naila's voice echoed from the mouth of the cave. He rolled over, grabbing his rifle in the same motion. How many? At least 8, she shouted, firing another burst around the edge of the rocks. They found the skimmer. Cassian swore under his breath. He should have buried it better. Sliding next to her, he took position behind a boulder, sighting through his scope. Figures moved along the ridgeline, ducking between outcrops and blasting at the cave's entrance. Definitely ember blades, Naila confirmed. Looks like our welcoming party brought friends. Cassian surveyed the terrain. We're pinned. But there's a second exit deeper in. I saw it while you were sleeping. Naila glanced sideways, a little impressed. You didn't mention it. Always good to have options. She covered him as he darted back to grab their packs and gear. The pirates were creeping closer, emboldened by superior numbers. As Cassian returned, blaster fire punched into the wall just above his head, sending fragments raining down. Time to move, he said, handing Naila her pack. They retreated deeper into the cave, beams from their tactical flashlights sweeping through tight tunnels. Dust fell with every distant blast. Cassian found a crevice he'd spotted earlier, a narrow crack barely wide enough for one person at a time. You first, he said. Naila slipped through easily, her lean frame agile and efficient. Cassian followed, squeezing through the jagged rocks until they emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up a sheer cliff. Below, the dry ravine floor wound through jagged rock like a bone-white serpent. Options? Naila asked, scanning the edge. Cassian pointed to a switchback trail that descended the cliffside. There. If we reach the bottom, we can disappear into the canyons. Blaster fire shattered a boulder nearby. The pirates had spotted them. Go! Cassian shouted, shoving her toward the trail. Naila moved fast, but the rocky path was unstable. They were halfway down when a shot hit the cliff just ahead of her. The ledge cracked and gave way. She screamed, arms flailing, as her feet slipped from the edge. Cassian lunged, grabbing her wrist just as she began to fall. The strain nearly yanked him down with her, but he locked his boots against the rock, muscles screaming. I've got you, he growled. She stared up at him, surprised by the raw determination in his face. Then, using his leverage, she scrambled back up. They stood panting, eyeing the pirates still clambering from the cave above. Naila pulled her sidearm. Let's even the odds. She fired 3 precise shots. 2 pirates tumbled, their bodies bouncing down the rocks. Cassian gave a low whistle. Show off. They reached the ravine floor and moved quickly. Without the skimmer, they were on foot across one of the harshest terrains on Volcara. Naila checked her handheld. The obsidian hollows are about 15 hours away. If we move fast. Then we don't stop, Cassian said, pushing forward. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. The sun's reflection off the black sand made the air shimmer. Cassian's canteen was nearly dry, and Naila's skin, normally vibrant, had taken on a faintly pale hue. We need shade, he said, spotting an overhang ahead. Beneath the jagged rocks, they found a sliver of relief. Naila slumped against the stone, trying to hide the way she winced. You're hurt, Cassian said, crouching beside her. It's nothing, she replied, but the stiffness in her voice betrayed her. Let me see. After a beat of resistance, she relented and turned slightly. Her side bandage was soaked with fresh blood. The earlier wound had reopened. Cassian opened his medkit. Hold still. She began removing her top for better access, then shot him a glance. No peeking. He chuckled. I've seen blood before. And what about everything else? I'll try to restrain myself, he said dryly, turning away as she repositioned her wrap. When she was ready, he cleaned the wound again, working with precision. Naila clenched her jaw but stayed still. Her skin was warm under his hands, and the markings near her ribs pulsed faintly, as if responding to his touch. "They're even brighter now," he noted. "We glow under stress," she replied, her voice softer. "Or, other emotions." He finished applying the healing gel and bandage, trying not to stare. "Must make poker games difficult." She smiled weakly. "Don't worry. We don't gamble." Cassian handed back her top. "You're clear." She pulled it on carefully, her jaw still tight. "Thanks." They rested a little longer, drinking what water remained. Cassian noticed the steady dust cloud growing behind them. "They're tracking us," he said grimly. Naila nodded. "Probably a flanking unit from the cave." Cassian scanned the horizon. "We need a bottleneck. Something we can control." She pointed ahead. "There. Canyon narrows about 2 clicks east. Perfect for an ambush." They moved quickly, fatigue weighing heavier with each step. By the time they reached the choke point, engines rumbled in the distance. 2 desert transports roared into view, kicking up a storm behind them. Cassian dropped his pack and pulled a compact device from the side pouch. Sonic grenade. Should disorient them long enough. Naila moved to the opposite side of the canyon, taking position behind a towering boulder. Cassian armed the device and rolled it into the center of the canyon. The high-pitched whine filled the air just as the vehicles reached the kill zone. The pirates clutched their heads, reeling. Cassian and Naila opened fire. The first 3 fell before they could raise weapons. Chaos erupted. Pirates scrambled for cover, shouting and firing blindly. Cassian rolled behind another rock as a bolt scorched past his shoulder. He popped up and dropped a 4th enemy. Across the canyon, Naila flowed between stone columns like a dancer of death. Every shot she took landed centermass. Cassian caught movement at his side, an enemy with a blade. The pirate lunged, slashing wide. Cassian blocked with his rifle, the blade cutting deep into the stock. He countered with a boot to the knee, then pulled his sidearm and fired at point-blank range. "Behind you!" Naila shouted. He spun just in time to see another pirate aiming. Too slow. But Naila's bolt tore through the attacker's neck. The fight ended minutes later. 7 pirates down. No backup in sight. Naila slumped behind a crate, breathing hard. Cassian checked his grazed arm. "We alive?" "Barely." They scavenged what they could, ammo, supplies, and found 1 transport intact. As they loaded it, Cassian noticed Naila moving slower than usual. "You're not driving," he said, taking the controls. She blinked at him. "Since when do you get bossy?" "Since you started bleeding again." To his surprise, she didn't argue. They roared across the darkening sands, the first stars glimmering overhead. Beside him, Naila finally let her head rest against the seat, her hand drifting near his on the control panel. "We make a good team," Cassian murmured. "Don't get used to it, human," she replied, eyes still closed. But her fingers stayed there, brushing his. And in that moment, neither of them felt quite so alone. Part 4. The obsidian hollows weren't a place anyone stumbled upon by accident. A ragged scar in the desert, the jagged cliffs rose like fangs from the cracked earth, dark stone shimmering with glassy reflections beneath the moon's glow. Cassian parked the stolen transport behind a rise, cutting the engine. "We walk from here," Naila said, eyes scanning the ravine's entrance. "Any closer and their motion scanners will pick us up." "Lovely neighborhood," he muttered, grabbing his gear. "Got a map?" "Better," she replied, holding up the stolen data core. "There's a ventilation shaft. Narrow, but it should bypass most of their perimeter defenses." Cassian raised a brow. "You've done this before." "I've tracked them long enough to know their patterns," Naila said simply. "Pirates recycle tactics. Predictable and lazy." They found the fissure tucked behind a natural outcropping, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The entry was small, Cassian had to strip off his armor and squeeze sideways to get through. The shaft beyond was narrow and reeked of metallic decay. Crawling in single file, their only light came from Naila's wrist lamp, casting eerie glows along the steel-lined tunnel. The silence was broken only by their breath and the occasional creak of settling stone. "Smells like something died in here," Cassian whispered. "Probably several somethings." They emerged into a dim maintenance corridor, metal grates beneath their hands echoing with each movement. Naila pulled a multi-tool from her belt and popped open a panel near a sealed hatch. "Old model," she said. "Easy." Cassian kept watch while she bypassed the lock. It opened with a hiss, revealing a cramped maintenance bay filled with parts, wiring, and spare uniforms. "Perfect," she said, tossing him a bundle. "Maintenance crew disguises. Not top-tier security, but they'll get us through the unmonitored halls." Cassian pulled the jumpsuit over his gear, noting the red-accented insignia of the ember blades on the sleeve. "Not exactly your color," Naila said as she adjusted her own suit. Cassian smirked. "You're one to talk." They turned away from each other to change, but privacy was a joke in the tiny room. Cassian caught a glimpse of Naila's bare back, the silver-white cascade of her hair brushing over her glowing markings. The sight was enough to tighten his chest. She looked over her shoulder. "Still peeking, human." "Professional curiosity," he said with a wink. "Is that what you call it?" They slipped into the corridor, adopting a slow, deliberate pace, mimicking the bored gait of workers used to long shifts. The base was busier than expected. Armed pirates strode past them, shouting orders and hauling crates of unknown tech. Cassian leaned close. "Something's up." Naila's face was tight with focus. "They're prepping for a move. Big one." They made their way to the central lift and descended 2 levels. Here, the atmosphere was even more chaotic. Flashing warning lights and audible alarms hinted at some discovery beneath the base. As they stepped out into the corridor, a shout halted them. "Hey! You two, stop!" A broad-shouldered officer stomped toward them, eyes sharp with suspicion. "ID chips," he barked. Cassian reached subtly toward his concealed blaster, but Naila stepped forward, flashing a disarming smile. "New transfers," she said confidently. "Sent from the Dune Vale outpost after the last ambush. Commander Vest told us to report to Maintenance Sub 3. The officer frowned. Vest didn't log any transfers. "Last minute," she replied, stepping subtly into his space. "They lost half their crew. You know how it is." He reached toward his belt, and Cassian tensed, then the officer froze, his eyes wide. Naila's blade was buried cleanly beneath his ribs. Cassian caught the body before it could fall. "Well. So much for subtle." Naila grabbed a keycard from the corpse and wiped her blade. "We've got about 5 minutes before someone notices." They dragged the body into a storage closet and locked it. Inside the tiny room, barely lit by a flickering emergency panel, they stood chest to chest, breathing hard. Naila looked up at him, her violet eyes unreadable. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. Cassian's hand rose, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Terrible." Their lips met, slow at first, testing, unsure, before the tension of the last few days exploded into hunger. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, his fingers dug into her waist. Time blurred, the war outside the door momentarily forgotten. When they finally broke apart, panting, Naila rested her forehead against his. "We should focus on the mission," he finished, not moving. Then the alarm changed. Cassian pulled away and cracked the door. Pirates were rushing down the corridor, shouting. "That's not about us," Naila said, watching them pass. "Something else." Cassian grinned. "Perfect distraction. Let's hit the command center." They blended in with the crowd, moving with the flow until they ducked into a side corridor and found the control room. Inside, terminals flickered with incoming data, pirate officers barking at technicians. They kept their heads down, approaching a terminal near the rear. Naila plugged in the officer's stolen card. "We're in," she whispered. Cashin leaned over her shoulder as lines of data scrolled past. Schematics. Weapon manifests. Tactical deployments. Then, something different. A schematic of a long, cylindrical device, etched with ancient markings, glowing faint blue. "What is that?" he whispered. Naila's face paled. "Precollapse tech. That's a matter disruptor." Cashin blinked. "A what?" "It breaks atomic bonds. Planet scale. It could level an entire star system." Cashin stared at the screen. "They're targeting the Lyran system." "My home," Naila said, her voice flat. Deployment orders blinked on screen. "Final prep, 57 minutes. We have to destroy it," she said, already pulling the schematics. They slipped back into the corridor unnoticed, tension mounting. Cashin checked the plan layout. "Storage tunnels here. We can use the ventilation shafts to bypass security again." Naila nodded. "Then we plant charges and end this." The shaft they crawled through was even tighter than before. Cashin grunted as he pushed aside debris, clearing the path. Naila crawled behind, her movements quiet and alert. At the end, they looked down into a vast excavation chamber. The weapon sat in the center, surrounded by machinery and guards. And in front of it stood a tall figure with pale blue skin and cruel eyes. "That's Captain Malthur," Naila hissed. "He led the raid on my world." Cashin touched her arm. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice," she whispered. They waited for a guard rotation, then slipped into the shadows of the chamber. Cashin pulled a bandolier of charges from his pack. "I'll plant. You cover." But before he could move, a commotion at the main entrance halted them. Pirates shoved a bound prisoner into the room, Illyrian, silver hair tangled, eyes defiant. Naila gasped. "She's one of mine. From my colony." Malthur stepped forward, sneering. The Lyrian woman spat at him. He raised his weapon. Cashin turned to Naila. "Change of plan. We save her. Then we blow the device." Naila hesitated, torn. "I'll get the prisoner. You make a diversion." She nodded. "Make it count." Then she vanished into the shadows. Moments later, an explosion rocked the far end of the chamber. Alarms blared. Pirates scrambled toward the chaos. Only 2 guards remained by the weapon and the prisoner. Cashin moved fast. 2 shots, 2 bodies dropped. He cut the prisoner's bonds. "Naila sent me. Can you run?" The Lyrian woman nodded. "I'm not broken yet." Cashin pointed. "Go. That tunnel." She darted away just as Cashin approached the weapon. He'd just started placing charges when a voice rang out, cold and mocking. "I wouldn't do that, human." Malthur stood 10 feet away, blaster raised. And behind him, 2 pirates dragging Naila, bloodied but furious. "Well," Cashin muttered. "This got complicated." Cashin stood still, fingers hovering near the detonator, but his mind raced through scenarios. Malthur's blaster never wavered, and the pirates holding Naila had her pinned between them, a thin line of blood trickling from her lip. But her violet eyes, fierce and clear, met Cashin's across the chamber. No fear. Only readiness. "Drop the detonator," Malthur ordered, stepping closer. Cashin did, slowly, his hands still raised. "You're braver than most humans who stumble into my path," the pirate captain said, circling the massive weapon. "And dumber." "I get that a lot," Cashin replied, scanning for weaknesses in the room. What is this, then? Scientific curiosity? Or just genocide for fun? Malthor smiled thinly, gesturing to the glowing disruptor. Power, human. The kind of power that ends wars before they begin. The Lyrian homeworld sits atop rare crystal deposits. With this, he tapped the side of the ancient device. I don't need armies. Naila struggled in her captor's grip. You slaughtered entire colonies. Necessary sacrifices, he said coldly. And besides, your kind was fading already. You're what, down to a few thousand? His pale eyes locked on Cashin. But a human and a Lyrian? That's a novelty. Tell me, what is she to you? Just a temporary partner? A curiosity? He stepped between them, blaster shifting toward Naila. Cashin's voice was quiet, but steady. She's the reason you're going to lose. Malthor raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Naila moved first. She slammed her head backward into the face of the pirate restraining her. Bone cracked. The second pirate jerked back, trying to tighten his grip, but she twisted, slamming her elbow into his ribs. Cashin dove for the detonator. Malthor fired, but the bolt missed, scorching the floor. Cashin rolled, lifted his sidearm, and fired 3 shots. The first 2 clipped stone. The third caught one of the guards in the leg, sending him down. Naila spun and kicked the second pirate into the weapon's base, then reached for her dropped blaster. She fired without hesitation. Malthor staggered as a bolt hit his shoulder. But he didn't fall. With a snarl, he dove behind the disruptor, using its bulk as cover. Cashin scrambled to his feet, pulling a pair of charges from his belt and hurling them toward the device. Cover. Naila dove behind a crate. Cashin fired a bolt at the charges just before they landed, setting them off mid-air. The resulting explosion was far more intense than expected. The ancient metal absorbed the blast, and began to pulse. First blue. Then red. Naila's voice cracked through the smoke. Cashin, it's destabilizing. He stared as the weapon's core expanded outward, energy vibrating off its surface in slow, angry waves. We need to go, she shouted. Cashin ran to her side. The rescued Lyrian woman appeared in the side passage, waving them forward. They didn't look back. Behind them, the air warped, crackling with power. Lights blew out. Sirens failed. Energy pulses cracked consoles and ignited backup fuel tanks. The entire chamber shook. They scrambled into the shaft, Naila pausing only to fire a burst behind her, dropping a pursuing pirate. The tunnel twisted as tremors began collapsing the metal plates behind them. Stone groaned, beams collapsed. Heat rushed behind them like a wave. At the far end of the shaft, they emerged into a corridor, only to find the base in chaos. Pirates ran in every direction, some already boarding escape pods, others shouting over broken intercoms. This way. Naila led them down a side path toward the secondary hangar. They skidded around a corner, and froze. Malthor stood in their path, bloodied and limping, but alive. His coat was scorched, one arm dangling uselessly, but the other still held his blaster. You've ruined everything, he spat. Before either of them could raise their weapons, the Lyrian prisoner, now free, lunged from behind. She tackled him to the floor, the blaster firing harmlessly into the wall. Go, she shouted. I'll hold him. Cashin hesitated, but Naila grabbed his arm. She's giving us a chance. They burst into the hangar. Smaller vessels lined the far wall, some already prepped for emergency evacuation. Cashin picked one that looked light and fast, yanking the bay door open. He took the pilot's seat while Naila slid into the co-pilot position. Her hands were slick with sweat and blood, her chest rising and falling rapidly. You good? She nodded once. Fly. As they lifted off, a blast rippled across the hangar floor. The wall crumbled inward. Cassian yanked the controls upward, dodging a falling crane. Metal rained from above. "Do you see her?" Naila asked, straining to look back. Cassian scanned the debris. Nothing. Instead, a tiny pod launched from the secondary dock, Malthor's pod. He was escaping. Naila's face hardened. "Take us around." Cassian didn't argue. They swung wide, looped behind the smoking ravine, and locked onto the escape pod just as it cleared the blast radius. Naila's finger hovered over the trigger. Her voice was low. "For my people." She fired. The pod exploded in a white-hot burst. Behind it, the obsidian hollows ruptured. The disruptor's final energy wave tore through the ravine, collapsing it inward like a dying star. The shockwave hit their ship seconds later, sending them spinning. Cassian fought the controls, stabilizing just as they cleared the debris field. Silence followed. He engaged autopilot. Naila sat in the co-pilot's seat, unmoving. Her hands clenched, her body trembling with the adrenaline aftershock. Cassian didn't speak. He simply reached over, placing a hand over hers. She turned toward him, her eyes shimmering with tears and fury and relief. "It's over," he said gently. Naila looked out the viewport, watching the ruins vanish behind them in the distance. "My home is avenged," she whispered. Cassian slid his hand up to her shoulder. She leaned into it without protest. "But not without loss," she added. "I know," he said. They stayed like that for a long moment. Finally, Naila exhaled, long and slow. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Cassian gave her a small smile. "That depends. Are we still going our separate ways?" Naila turned, met his gaze, and kissed him. Soft, slow, and filled with everything neither had said out loud until now. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I think I might need to reevaluate." He chuckled. "Good." The ship hummed quietly around them. The stars stretched into lines as they jumped into hyperspace, heading toward the unknown, but together. 6 months had passed. Where once there was dust, ash, and fire, now there were trees, laughter, and life. On a forested moon in the Vega system, nestled within a wide valley rich with water and soil, the Lyrian outpost known as Newer had become a thriving sanctuary. Cassian Holt stood on the balcony of a modest dwelling carved into the cliffs, watching the twin moons rise over the treeline. From this vantage point, he could see children playing near the stream, rows of homes lit with soft, golden light, and elders gathered in quiet circles, weaving or singing. It was peace, something he hadn't believed in for years. Arms slid around his waist. "Credit for your thoughts," Naila murmured against his back. He smiled, resting his hands over hers. "Just, appreciating the view." "Regretting anything?" "Not one damn thing," Cassian said, turning to face her. Naila was radiant in the moonlight. Her silver hair was longer now, falling freely around her shoulders. Her skin, always glowing with those shifting markings, now had an even deeper luminescence, especially around her abdomen. Cassian placed a hand on her belly, feeling the small curve that had grown slowly over the past months. "How are you feeling?" "No more morning sickness," she said with a note of relief. "Elder Thea says that's normal in the second trimester." He nodded, though the word normal still felt like wishful thinking. A human Lyrian pregnancy was unprecedented. The elders had claimed it wasn't biologically possible. Until Naila proved otherwise. "They want to meet again," she added quietly, voice tinged with tension. Cassian groaned. "Already?" "We just spoke with them." "They're not trying to pressure us, Cass," Naila said. "They're trying to understand. Our child represents something bigger than us. Something no one expected." Cashin let out a breath and led her back inside. Their home was simple: stone walls, warm lighting, soft furniture crafted from local wood and Lyrian textiles. It smelled faintly of jasmine and spices. "I get it," he said, sitting down beside her. "I just don't like them poking around. You're not some specimen." Naila reached for his hand and placed it gently back on her belly. "Feel that?" He did. A soft flutter. Faint movement. Cashin's eyes widened. "That's our child," Naila confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. He felt something crack open in his chest, a swell of emotion more powerful than any combat high or battlefield victory. "I never thought I'd be a father," he admitted. "And definitely not here, in the middle of nowhere." Naila tilted her head. "Are you disappointed?" "God, no." His hand tightened over hers. "I'm terrified. But never disappointed." They sat in silence, her head resting on his shoulder. Outside, wind rustled the leaves, and distant singing drifted up from the valley below. Later, in bed, Naila traced the scars on his chest, each one a story from his past. "I've been thinking about names," she said softly. "We still have time. Lyrians believe names shape the spirit from conception," she explained. "So, we name early." Cashin propped himself on one elbow. "You have one in mind?" "If it's a girl." "Lyra. After my homeworld." He nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "And if it's a boy?" Naila hesitated. "Thomas. After your father." Cashin swallowed hard. He had told her about his father one night under the stars, how he had died protecting a Martian outpost during a pirate raid. He'd be honored. Naila smiled, but then her expression shifted. "There's something else." He tensed. "Go on." "The council received a transmission today. From your guild." Cashin sat upright. "What do they want?" "They've been tracking remnants of the Ember Blades. Small splinter groups. They want your help cleaning them up." Cashin rubbed his temples. He had never formally resigned, just disappeared. Took personal leave, extended into oblivion. "What did you tell them?" "That you have more important responsibilities now," Naila said gently, resting her hand on her abdomen again. "But they want confirmation." Cashin was silent for a long moment. "I'll call them tomorrow," he said at last. "Make it official. No more bounty hunter. No more coalition." Naila studied his face. "Are you sure?" He took her hand. "I was that man. But people change. I've changed. This, us, is what matters now." The next morning, they walked hand in hand through the village square, past groves of fruit-bearing trees and gardens filled with herbs. Children played along the path. Elders nodded in greeting. The council chamber was a circular stone structure, its interior filled with warm light and decorated with Lyrian glyphs. 5 elders sat in a semicircle as Cashin and Naila entered. Naila Virine. Cashin Holt, Elder Thaya greeted, her voice calm but firm. "We thank you for coming." Cashin inclined his head respectfully. Despite his usual skepticism, he understood the gravity of what was happening. "We've reviewed your latest scans," the elder continued. "The child develops with attributes from both species. Is there any danger to her?" Cashin asked immediately. "None we can detect," Elder Marin replied. "In fact, Naila's body appears uniquely adapted to carry the child." Naila tilted her head. "What are you saying?" Elder Thaya exchanged a glance with her colleagues. "We believe the compatibility may not be coincidence." Another elder leaned forward. "We've been running genetic comparisons based on the samples you provided. There are ancient markers, shared by both Lyrians and humans. Traits that predate the Great Collapse. Cashin's brow furrowed. You think our species were once connected? Or perhaps derived from a common ancestor, Thea said. It would explain much. Naila absorbed the words slowly. And our child? Could be the beginning of something long thought impossible, Marin said. Hope. Not just for Lyrians. For everyone. As they walked back through the village, the weight of the revelation settled over them. The world had changed, again. A new beginning, Naila murmured. I like the sound of that. Cashin squeezed her hand. Me too. That evening, as lanterns lit up the central gathering space, Naila joined a group of young Lyrians, sharing stories of survival and rebuilding. Cashin slipped away briefly, heading toward the small forge behind the settlement. When he returned, Naila met him beneath the overlook where they had once stood staring at the stars. Where did you go? She asked, curious. Walk with me, Cashin said. They stepped onto the ridge, overlooking the settlement. Lights flickered below, and fireflies danced in the tall grass. Cashin turned to her, took her hand, and placed something small and smooth in her palm. A ring. Polished obsidian, inlaid with fragments of luminescent crystal from the Vega cliffs. It pulsed with a soft inner glow. On Earth, Cashin said quietly, this is what we give when we choose to build a life together. Naila stared down at it, understanding dawning in her eyes. It's beautiful. It's made from a piece of the ravine where we fought side by side, he explained. And the crystal is from here, our new home. He swallowed hard. Naila Virine, will you marry me? Tears shimmered in her eyes. She slipped the ring on her finger. Yes, she whispered. To everything. And above them, the stars witnessed a vow that would ripple far beyond Vega. Celebration swept through the valley like firelight, gentle, warm, and filled with life. When Cashin and Naila announced their engagement later that evening, the entire Lyrian settlement gathered. Lanterns floated up into the sky, rising like new stars, and music echoed between the trees as children danced and elders wept softly with joy. But amid the cheer and laughter, Cashin only had eyes for her. Naila stood at the heart of the crowd, her silver hair catching the lantern light, her skin radiant with an otherworldly glow that had deepened over the months. Her hand remained protectively over the small swell of her belly. Every so often, she glanced at Cashin, and when she did, he saw it in her eyes, not just affection, but awe. They had survived death, destruction, betrayal, and now they stood in a place where possibility lived. Cashin joined her at the edge of the circle. You look like a goddess, he murmured. Don't get used to it, she teased. I'm still going to kick you out of bed when I can't sleep. He grinned and kissed her forehead. Fair deal. As the night wore on, they retreated to the quiet cliff above the settlement, the same one where Cashin had proposed. They stood in silence for a while, staring out across the land, watching the moons climb higher. Naila broke the quiet first. I keep thinking about that day in the desert. When you looked at me and said you liked direct plans. Cashin chuckled. And you said something about me still playing with toy guns. Still true, she said, bumping his shoulder. Then her tone shifted. I didn't think anything would survive the Reavers, not me, not my people, certainly not our future. But you did, he said. We did. They walked back to their home, hand in hand, and later, after the celebrations faded and the settlement fell quiet. Cashin stirred awake to find Naila sitting upright in bed, her profile silhouetted by the moonlight. What's wrong? He asked, rising. I've been feeling them more often, she whispered. The flutters. The movement. Cashin slid in beside her, placing his hand on her belly again. There it was. Stronger this time. A definite push against his palm. She's already a fighter, he said. Naila smiled. Don't sound so sure it's a girl. I just have a feeling. She turned toward him, her expression suddenly serious. If anything happens to me. No. Cassian. I mean it. Don't say that. His voice was firmer than he intended. You're not alone. Not anymore. I'm not going to lose you. Naila held his gaze for a long moment. Then promise me something. Anything. No matter what the guild says, no matter what threats come next, you stay with me. With us. This is your world now. He leaned forward and kissed her, slow and steady. I've already made that choice. Later, in the early hours of morning, a soft chime echoed through their home. Cassian groaned and rolled over. Not now. Naila was already climbing out of bed, wrapping herself in a shawl. She returned with a handheld message console. Encrypted. From the guild. Cassian sat up, wiping sleep from his eyes. Again. She handed it to him, and he read the short missive. Urgent request. Intelligence confirms remaining Reaver fractions regrouping near Perseus Drift. Full deployment in 72 hours. Your experience is requested. Response required. Cassian exhaled. You don't have to go, Naila said. We've done enough. I know, he replied. She sat beside him, her hand on his thigh. But if you want to go, I won't stop you. He stared at the message for a long time. The part of him that had survived a dozen battles, tracked fugitives across uncharted systems, and dismantled pirate strongholds, that part stirred. But then he looked at her. At the promise of something greater growing inside her. At the life they were building. He reached for the console and typed one word. Declined. Naila rested her head on his shoulder. That was easy. No, he said honestly. But it was right. A week later, they were invited back to the council chambers. This time, Elder Thea wasn't alone. A human ambassador stood beside her, one of the first official visitors from the coalition since the destruction of the Obsidian Hollows. Cassian Holt, the ambassador said. We've heard of your decision. I'm out, Cassian said without hesitation. The ambassador smiled. Then let me speak plainly. The guild doesn't just want your return. They want a future. One where humans and Lyrians work together. And this child, he nodded to Naila's belly, may be proof that it's possible. Thea added, we believe the same. But we also believe that future must come with peace, not obligation. Cassian exchanged a glance with Naila. We're not interested in raising a child under a spotlight, he said. But we'll help where we can. That's all we ask, the ambassador replied. That night, Cassian and Naila walked once more to the cliff's edge. He looked out over Newer, remembering the wasteland they had left behind. The world looks different now, he said. Because it is, Naila replied. They stayed until the stars blinked on overhead, silent witnesses to a new beginning. The months that followed brought change, not the explosive kind that tore through pirate bases or shook desert cliffs, but quiet, persistent, meaningful change. Newer expanded. More Lyrians arrived each week, survivors from scattered colonies, travelers who had heard whispers of a rebirth. Cassian helped construct shelters, train security teams, and dig irrigation channels. It was the hardest work he'd ever done, but the kind that left him exhausted and content. And Naila. Naila became a leader. Not by vote or declaration, but by presence. People gathered around her. Her calm steadiness, her unflinching gaze, her quiet encouragement. The child growing inside her became more than a miracle. It became a symbol. A sign that perhaps the darkness of the past didn't get the final word. One night, just as the blue wildflowers began to bloom across the valley floor, Naila woke Cassian with a whisper. It's time. No panic. No dramatics. Just certainty. He was on his feet in seconds, helping her dress, calling for the midwives. The home filled with hushed voices and warm light. Outside, the moons were full and high. An omen, the elders later said. Cassian sat beside her, gripping her hand through the hours. Naila didn't scream. She growled. Breathed. Focused. Fought. He had seen her kill pirates with less intensity than she gave to every wave of pain. And then. A cry. High and strong. Small and powerful. Cassian's world changed forever in a single heartbeat. A girl. With amber-brown skin that shimmered faintly in the light. A halo of silver fuzz already beginning to curl. And, when her eyes finally opened, violet. Naila held her close, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She's perfect, she whispered. Cassian could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They named her Lyra. For Naila's home. For her people. For the constellation above them. Word spread quickly. By morning, villagers stood quietly outside their home, leaving flowers, gifts, or simply nodding in silent reverence. This child wasn't just a symbol. She was a beginning. Weeks later, Cassian stood with Lyra in his arms as Naila watched from the doorway, amused and exhausted. Are you seriously trying to teach her how to calibrate a blaster? She asked. Never too early for basic safety, he replied, rocking the baby gently. She needs to know what a trigger is. Naila laughed. You're impossible. Only because you love me. Tragically, she teased. He walked over, kissed her forehead, and pressed their daughter into her arms. She's going to be a force of nature. Obviously, Naila said, smiling down at Lyra. That evening, the council convened again. But this time, it wasn't to study or question. It was to ask for Cassian and Naila's guidance. Together, they began drafting the foundation of something new, an alliance. Not a political contract, but a shared future. One built not on treaties, but trust. Human visitors began to arrive. Carefully at first. Diplomats. Doctors. Historians. Then families. Cassian and Naila welcomed each one personally. One night, as the settlement celebrated the annual Festival of Stars, a Lyrian tradition marking unity and light, Cassian slipped away from the crowd. Naila found him sitting on the overlook, Lyra cradled against his chest. Couldn't sleep. She's a night owl. Like her mother. Naila sat beside him and leaned into his shoulder. Together, they stared out at the lights of Newer. Do you ever miss it? She asked quietly. The hunt? The missions? Sometimes, Cassian admitted. But not enough to leave this. Naila looked up at him. Good. They sat in silence as Lyra drifted to sleep. Then, without warning, Cassian said, we should train her. Teach her both sides. Human grit. Lyrian discipline. She'll be ready for anything, Naila agreed. And when she's older? We'll tell her how it began. Cassian kissed the top of his daughter's head. And maybe, how the stars crossed paths and gave us all a second chance. Naila smiled. Somewhere in the sky above, those stars still burned, silent, distant, timeless. But in that quiet corner of the galaxy, among forest moons and blooming wildflowers, a new story had begun. And it was only just getting started. And that's how a human bounty hunter and a fierce alien mercenary defied the odds, surviving war, toppling a pirate empire, and rewriting the future of two species. Cassian and Naila's story wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing hope over hate, unity over fear, and love over war. From the blazing dunes of Valkera 4 to the quiet valleys of Newer, they didn't just leave a trail of blaster bolts and broken enemies. They left a legacy. A daughter born of two worlds. A new alliance. A new chapter in a galaxy that had nearly forgotten what peace looked like. Their journey shows us that the greatest victories don't always come from the barrel of a gun, but from the people we choose to fight beside, and the futures we dare to build with them. So whether you're a spacefarer, a fan of star-crossed stories, or just someone who believes that love and grit can change the world, thank you for joining me on this ride. If you enjoyed this sci-fi tale and want more stories just like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and share this video with your fellow adventurers. We've got more coming: space battles, forbidden alliances, alien mysteries, and more epic storytelling. Until next time, keep your plasma charged, your helmet sealed, and your heart open. The stars are watching.